Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. 10 years. That's how long I'd given this place. 10 years of early mornings and late nights, of finishing what others started, of covering for missed deadlines, smoothing over client tensions, and picking up every invisible thread that kept Nexera Solutions from unraveling. I never asked for praise, never demanded credit, but I made things work. That was my superpower. I made things work. My desk was immaculate, just the way I kept my code, precise, organized, quietly brilliant. I even alphabetized the client folders in the shared drive, though no one noticed. Or so I thought. It was a Monday when I decided. Not because anything dramatic happened, not because I was pushed, but because I realized I'd done everything they ever asked. And more. I'd outlasted 5 managers, tripled our client retention rate, and designed a client-facing dashboard that was quietly being licensed to third-party firms, without ever getting my name on it. I was done waiting. So I knocked on the door. Frank Henley looked up from his monitor, eyes tired, fingers still half-tapping his keyboard. "Victoria," he said, voice neutral. "Come in." Frank had been my boss for 3 years. Middle-aged, slightly balding, a man who wore loafers with no socks and gave half-hearted pep talks during quarterly meetings. He was always polite, distantly so, but there was a subtle current to our interactions, like he never quite believed I had ideas of my own. I sat down, smoothed the hem of my slate-gray skirt, folded my hands. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've been with the company for 10 years. In that time, I've led 4 successful client onboarding migrations, developed the metric suite for our enterprise accounts, and helped retain over 80% of our top-tier clients." He blinked slowly. "You're incredibly valuable, Victoria. You know that?" I nodded once. "Thank you, which is why I believe it's time to revisit my compensation. I haven't had a raise in over 6 years, and I believe the work I've delivered justifies an adjustment." The silence that followed was long enough to stretch around the room. Frank leaned back, rubbed his jaw with the back of his hand. Then he laughed, just once. A short, sharp exhale. "I won't tolerate such arrogance," he said, suddenly louder. "You're fired." The words hit me like a slap in the cold. I stared at him, unmoving. "You come in here," he continued, voice rising, "and demand more money? After all we've done for you? This is why people like you don't lead. You do your job, and you expect the world. That's not how it works." I stood, not quickly, not in anger. I stood like a weight had just slipped off my shoulders. He didn't even meet my eyes. Just pointed toward the door like I was a temp who'd overstepped. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I walked out. But what Frank didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined in his neat little office with his borrowed authority, was that I already knew exactly what I was going to do next. I had the names, the contacts, the infrastructure, and in 4 days he would wake up to an empty client dashboard. 70% of our portfolio would be gone. Moved. Because I wasn't just an employee. I was the reason they stayed. And now, I was leaving. The walk back to my desk was silent. Not a single person lifted their head. Maybe they didn't hear. Maybe they pretended not to. That was the thing about corporate floors. Everyone heard everything, but no one ever looked up when it mattered. I slid into my chair slowly, my palms flat on the desk like they were grounding me. My monitor still glowed with the client dashboard I'd designed. Ironically, the same one Frank bragged about last month at the investors' lunch. He never mentioned who built it, just called it an in-house innovation. And I let him. For years, I let them. Let them take my ideas, pass over my name, hand bonuses to louder, flashier people who barely finished half their deliverables. I was the ghost who never missed a deadline, the hand that fixed bugs at midnight, the voice in every meeting that said, "I'll take care of it," even when it wasn't my job. But not anymore. Not after that. My resignation letter was already half written, not because I expected this, God, no, but because a small, persistent voice inside me had started whispering months ago, telling me it was time, that I'd outgrown this place, that my value was no longer something to offer, at least not to people who didn't know what to do with it. I finished the letter in 5 lines. No emotion, no flourish, just the facts. Effective immediately. No 2 weeks. No exit interview. They could figure it out on their own for once. Then I opened my personal drive. That's where the real work lived. My personal notes, system maps, client frameworks, all developed on my own time, on my own laptop. The heart of every successful client migration we'd pulled off since 2018? That was me. The retention scripts that lowered our churn rate by 27%? Also me. I hadn't stolen anything. I'd created everything. And I'd backed it up, separately, long ago. People think revenge is loud. It's not. The most devastating revenge is silent. It's simply absence. I copied what I needed, logged out, and deleted every script I'd built that wasn't part of their systems. Left them their public-facing facade, and took the logic behind it with me. As I zipped up my laptop sleeve, a deep calm settled over me. It was the same feeling I had when I solved a stubborn coding bug or closed a client deal with a single phone call. That sense of certainty, of knowing. I was not going to beg for recognition anymore. I was not going to let my story end in someone else's office, by someone else's temper. If they didn't know my worth after 10 years, then they never would. But someone else would. I slid my badge onto the desk, placed the letter on top, and took one last look around. Rows of desks, people in headsets, the muted hum of productivity. Nothing had changed, but everything had. I walked out without a word, but in the days to come, the silence I left behind would echo louder than any exit speech, because I wasn't erased. I was evolving. The first thing I did when I got home wasn't cry. It wasn't panic or rage-scroll job listings or call my sister to vent. No, I made a list. It wasn't long. 22 names. All clients. All people I'd worked with directly. People I'd supported through chaos, guided through system migrations, helped rebuild after disastrous executive decisions. These weren't just accounts to me. They were relationships, and they trusted me. The moment I hit send on a simple, straightforward email, just a line or two explaining I was moving on from Nexera and would be available for consulting, my inbox started pinging. Within 2 hours, I had 4 replies. By the next day, it was 9. And on the 3rd day, I had a meeting scheduled with Alchemy Consulting Group, a mid-sized strategy firm that handled infrastructure for several of the companies I'd worked with. They wanted to talk, not about a freelance gig, about a position, a new opportunity. I ironed my best blazer, the navy one I usually saved for annual review meetings that never went anywhere, and walked into their minimalist glass office 3 days after Frank fired me. The lobby smelled like eucalyptus and ambition. I waited maybe 5 minutes before a woman in a crisp white blouse stepped out, extended her hand, and said, "Victoria Dale?" "Yes," I replied, rising. "I'm Harper," she said. "Come with me. They're waiting." They turned out to be a small interview panel, 3 people, including the director of strategy, a VP, and a woman named Celine, whose name I recognized from industry conferences. Real players. The kind of people who actually built things. We exchanged pleasantries. Then the questions began, but not the ones I expected. Harper tapped her pen against my resume and looked up, brows gently furrowed. "Can I ask something, Victoria?" "Of course." "You stayed at Nexera for 10 years, she said, "but your title barely changed, from account manager to senior coordinator. That's surprising, especially with this portfolio." She gestured to the binder in front of her, an outline of the systems I designed, client feedback, the revenue increases directly tied to my work. I gave a small nod. I know. Why? It wasn't judgment in her voice, just genuine confusion. I considered my answer, then said the truest thing I could. Because I believed if I worked hard enough, eventually someone would notice. I thought value spoke for itself. Celine leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharper than before. And when did you stop believing that? I didn't even have to think. The moment I asked for a raise and got fired instead. No one laughed. No one shifted awkwardly. Instead, Harper sat back, folded her arms, and said quietly, "That's the wrong company's loss." They asked a few more technical questions, walked through scenarios, gave me cases, and I answered calmly, confidently, not like someone trying to impress, like someone who had nothing left to prove. The meeting wrapped with a handshake and a promise to follow up soon. By the time I got home, there was already an offer in my inbox. The role, Senior Strategic Consultant. The salary, double my last. But that wasn't what made me smile. What made me smile was the note at the bottom of the email from Harper. "We don't just want your experience, we want your voice, looking forward to what you'll build here." And for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. This was just the beginning. There's a particular kind of stillness in starting over. New desk, new ID badge, new protocols. My first day at Alchemy Consulting felt like waking up in a parallel universe, one where my ideas were asked for, my time respected, and my title matched the weight of what I brought to the table. They gave me a corner desk, a sleek dual-monitor setup, and a welcome packet with my name embossed on the folder. I'd never had my name on anything before, not even on the projects I built from scratch. And yet, even as I settled in, something strange began to happen. On my second day, a receptionist knocked softly on my cubicle wall. "Victoria, you've got a client call on line 3. Says it's urgent, specifically asked for you." I blinked. Did they say who? Monroe Systems. I hadn't even gotten through HR orientation yet. I picked up. "Victoria Dale speaking." The voice on the other end was warm, familiar. "Hi, Victoria. It's Damon from Monroe. Just wanted to check if you're still available for direct project support. We're about to restructure our backend, and honestly, we'd only feel comfortable if it was with you." I hesitated, glancing around the unfamiliar office. "I'm at a new firm now, but I'd be happy to discuss how we could support you." "Great," Damon said. "I already talked to your new team. They said to loop you in. We'll move forward only if you're leading it." Only if I'm leading it. That was the first moment, but not the last. 2 days later, it was Halcyon Tech, the cybersecurity firm I'd quietly salvaged last quarter when their entire account system almost collapsed. They wanted me. Then Riva and Moore, the financial group who still used my spreadsheet macros because their new ones always failed. They called too. The pattern was unmistakable. Clients didn't want a consultant. They wanted me. Alchemy noticed. Fast. By the end of my first week, Celine pulled me aside. "Not to put pressure on you," she said with a slight grin, "but you're becoming something of a magnet." I laughed, a little nervously. "I didn't mean to poach." "You didn't," she said simply. "You kept relationships. That's a skill most firms undervalue, until it starts costing them." By the following Monday, I wasn't just managing clients, I was leading entire account realignments. And the firm's internal chatter had shifted. Not in a threatening way, but in an odd, slightly reverent way. People started asking to shadow my meetings. Project managers peeked into my calendars. Someone even whispered the word partner track in the break room. But none of that surprised me as much as what came next. An anonymous email. Subject: your work was never invisible. No body. Just a single attachment. A spreadsheet. Massive, detailed. A breakdown of every client I'd ever touched at Nexera, showing exactly when their revenue increased, when they expanded, when they renewed. All tied to dates I'd led projects. No name on the email, but I knew what it was. Proof. Proof I had been the engine behind the scenes, that even when they ignored me, the numbers didn't lie. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I made another list, not of clients this time, of opportunities. Because if they were lining up just to work with me, maybe it was time to stop seeing myself as an employee and start thinking like something else, like a brand, like a business, like the kind of name people called first, not because they had to, but because they trusted it. One Face wasn't just a tagline in my head anymore. It was taking shape. And soon, it would be real. 3 weeks into my new role, my calendar was booked solid. Client strategy sessions, product audits, system overhauls. I was waking up before dawn and falling asleep with my laptop still glowing beside me. And yet, I'd never felt more alive. One morning, as I stirred my coffee in the break room, Harper approached with her phone in hand and a look that could only be described as calculated curiosity. "Morning," she said, handing me the phone. A screen capture glowed up at me, an industry article from Tech Pulse Weekly. Nexera faces. Major client exodus as 5 key accounts. Jump ship. Sources suggest the shift began shortly after a senior coordinator's abrupt departure. I stared at it. Harper watched me. "You want to explain this?" she asked, though her tone didn't sound accusatory. More impressed than anything. I handed the phone back. I didn't solicit anyone, but some people chose to follow the work. Celine joined us moments later, coffee in hand. "Is it true Monroe, Halcyon, and Riva were all your accounts at Nexera?" "Yes," she blinked. "That's over 70% of their Q1 revenue stream." "I know," I said, voice even. "So do they." We stood there in the quiet tension of that truth. Then Harper laughed, low and slow. "Victoria, you walked out with their lifeline and didn't even slam the door." I shrugged. Why bother? They never even looked back to see I'd left. Later that day, I was called into the executive wing. The glass conference room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and paper contracts. Celine sat at the head of the table, fingers laced. "We need to be clear," she said. "This influx? It's not coincidence. It's your reputation. You have leverage now, Victoria." I nodded. "Understood." Harper slid a thick folder across the table. "These are new client inquiries, all from firms that used to be loyal to Nexera. Every single one asked for you by name." I glanced at the logos. I knew every single one. The silence stretched, then Celine said, "We'd like to discuss transitioning your role from consultant to director." My heart stilled. "We want you to build something here," she continued. "Not just lead accounts, architect systems, mentor talent. Make this your platform." That night, I sat alone in my apartment, watching the lights of the city blink in the dark. On my desk, the Nexera article was still open on my screen, next to a draft sketch labeled One Face Initiative. But it wasn't until my phone buzzed with a new number that the moment turned surreal. I answered on instinct. "Victoria Dale?" "Yes." A pause. Then, "This is Aaron Voss. I'm Nexera's interim CEO." I said nothing. "We're aware several clients followed you. We were hoping you'd be willing to consult, externally, just for transition purposes. No strings attached." I almost laughed. He didn't know. He still didn't know. That the quiet woman in the back of the room had become the name reshaping his entire client base. "Thank you for the offer," I said calmly, "but I'm not available for transition work. I'm building something." "Understood," he said too quickly. I hung up and smiled, because this was no longer about a job. This was about building an empire with one face, my own. It started with a ping, just one, then 3, then 28. By the time I reached my office, my inbox had detonated. Unable to access shared files, Possible breach? Did your team authorize a system reboot? Why is your name linked to a data dump? I froze. My assistant burst through the door, breathless. Victoria, something's wrong, really wrong. Within minutes, our IT lead confirmed it. A coordinated cyber attack targeting clients linked to my portfolio. Internal dashboards were scrambled. Logan credentials corrupted. And then, leaks. Private client emails suddenly surfaced on tech forums, edited, twisted, made to look like I'd been negligent, dismissive, even manipulative. The headlines followed. Rising consultant under fire for breach linked to former employer. Is OneFace a one-woman operation too good to be true? I stared at my screen, the cursor blinking like a countdown. My name, my face, all being dragged through the digital mud. Harper and Celine pulled me into a crisis room within the hour. "We're going to get ahead of this," Celine said firmly. "We've already retained cyber forensics. This wasn't amateur." She was right. It wasn't. The attacks were too targeted, too precise. Only one organization knew which clients were mine, which accounts I personally handled, and which systems I built from scratch. Nexera. They were retaliating. I said it aloud, and the room went quiet. "Legally, that's an accusation," Harper said carefully. "Do you have proof?" Not yet. But I knew how to get it. Because Nexera hadn't just stolen my piece, they'd underestimated something else. I wasn't a developer who built in isolation anymore. I had allies. And one of them, an old friend from our shared internship class, still worked inside Nexera's IT team, quiet, brilliant, and disgusted by the games corporate execs played. I reached out. 36 hours later, I had the data trail, IP logs, server echoes, phantom shell access traced back to Nexera's internal systems. They'd tried to bury it in proxy chains and spoof accounts, but arrogance leaves fingerprints. I brought it all to Celine, who stared at the file for a long time before speaking. "You've just handed us a nuclear weapon." "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about clearing the fog and making sure this never happens again." That evening, Alchemy released a statement. A calm, measured message confirming the attack was external, targeted, and currently under legal review. It reaffirmed trust in our clients, in our integrity. But the final line was mine. To those attempting to discredit honest work, I built this reputation through action, not approval, and I'll protect it the same way. The press devoured it. The sympathy flipped. And just like that, the wave turned back toward me. But it didn't wash over me. It carried me forward. Because people respect resilience, and they never forget the one who refused to break. The invitation came disguised as civility. A polished email from Nexera's new CEO, Aaron Voss. Formal language, neutral tone. "We'd like to invite you to a strategic dialogue regarding potential collaboration. We believe a conversation could benefit both parties, especially given recent transitions." It was the kind of email meant to look like an olive branch, but I knew it for what it was. Desperation. They were bleeding. Client attrition had topped 60%. Their stock took a 17% dive after the data breach. And the whisper campaign they launched against me? It backfired. Badly. They didn't want collaboration. They wanted survival. And they thought I could hand it to them. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, "I'll come. On one condition, the meeting will be held at Alchemy's headquarters. My conference room. My terms." 3 days later, they walked into my building like they still mattered. Suits crisp, faces strained. Aaron Voss flanked by 2 legal advisors and, unmistakably, Frank Henley. He hadn't aged well. Still smug. Still dismissive. But I wasn't the quiet coordinator anymore. I met them in a glass-walled conference suite overlooking the city, my name etched on the frosted door behind me. Celine sat beside me, arms crossed, silent but present. I didn't need backup, but I wanted witnesses. "Victoria," Aaron began, carefully controlled. "We're here to explore a path forward. The market's shifting, and we see room for— For what?" I cut in. "For me to fix what you broke?" Frank flinched, barely. Aaron cleared his throat. "We're prepared to offer a licensing deal. Your systems, your oversight. We bring you back in, high level, full authority." I leaned back. "Why?" "Because," Frank said tightly, "you have what our clients want." "And you don't," I replied. The silence that followed was heavy. I stood slowly, walked to the end of the table, and dropped a folder in front of them. It wasn't a contract. It was an acquisition proposal, from me. Alchemy, backed by a quiet consortium of angel investors and 3 of Nexra's biggest former clients, had been preparing for weeks. The paperwork was airtight. Aaron opened it. His face went pale. "You're buying us?" he whispered. "No," I said. "I already did." Frank looked up, rage flickering behind his eyes. "This is insane. You're nobody. We built that company." "No," I said evenly. "I did. You just wore the title." Aaron's voice shook. "You're doing this for revenge." I smiled faintly. "No, this is business." Celine leaned forward. "The board has already been notified. The vote passes in 48 hours. You're out. Victoria's in." I walked to the window, the skyline glowing like a crown. "You tried to smear me," I said quietly. "You tried to erase me. You weaponized everything I built and still thought I'd come crawling back." I turned slowly. "I didn't come to negotiate." They stood, rattled, but they had no move left. Their empire had collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance, and I was the only one standing in the rubble with a blueprint. As they walked out, Frank paused. "You really think you'll make Nexra better?" I held his gaze. "No," I said. "I'll make it mine." I sat alone in my office, the city lights painting long, amber streaks across the floor. Outside, traffic pulsed like a heartbeat, and inside, silence cocooned me. For the first time in days, I let it in, the weight of what I had done. I used to be a name buried deep in the team roster. Support. Operations. Coordinator. The girl who always replied first, stayed latest, and never asked to speak. If you told me a year ago I'd be sitting on the verge of owning a corporation that once discarded me, I would have laughed. I never wanted to be this person. I just wanted to be seen. But wanting to be seen turned into building something they couldn't ignore. Alchemy's boardroom had gone quiet after the acquisition vote. Not stunned. Respectful. Celine clapped once, softly. Harper gave me the smallest nod, pride flickering in her eyes. And I smiled. Because I didn't win with rage. I won with precision. And yet, here I was, paper signed, the empire shifting beneath my feet, and all I could think was, how did I get here? One face, one reputation. That's all it took. Clients didn't come for the brand. They came for the trust. For the woman who never missed a deadline, who answered at 2 a.m., who fixed broken systems with no credit asked. That girl, the quiet one, she'd built a legacy while others fought over optics. I wasn't just a consultant anymore. I was infrastructure. I was strategy. I was the name people whispered when they wanted results. And now I wasn't whispering back. I thought of my first job, the cramped cubicle, the plastic plant on my desk, the way I used to shrink whenever someone raised their voice. I thought of Frank sneering at my raise request like I'd asked for the moon. Of the systems I built in silence, the documents I filed under generic names so no one knew where they came from. I had been invisible. Now I was everywhere. My inbox was flooded with offers, partnerships, acquisition pitches, speaking engagements. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know the story behind the surge, but I wasn't sure I wanted to tell it. Not all of it. Because this empire wasn't built on a single moment. It was built on every time I was told no and kept going. On every client who said, "I'll only work with her." On every night I stared at code until my eyes blurred, not for praise, but for purpose. And most of all, it was built on choosing not to shrink. This wasn't revenge. This was resurrection. At the edge of my desk sat a folded piece of paper, my old resignation letter, the one Frank never even read. I unfolded it slowly. "I'm leaving not because I failed to fit in, but because I finally understand I was never meant to." I traced the words with my fingers, then set it down beside a new document. A press release announcing the full acquisition of Nexera Solutions by Alchemy Ventures, spearheaded by director Victoria Dale. Tomorrow, the world would read it. Tomorrow, the mask would come off, not for ego, for truth, because it was time they saw the face behind the empire. The boardroom at Nexera was unrecognizable. Gone were the leather chairs and abstract art meant to impress investors. In their place, simple functionality, sharp lines, digital dashboards humming with real data. The kind I insisted on, the kind they once told me was too technical for leadership. Now, it was my signature. I stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, watching the last of the transition team file in. This was the final step, the last official act of the acquisition, the integration debrief. Most of Nexera's upper management was already gone, either resigned or quietly stepped down. Those who remained were the ones who knew how to listen, adapt, build. I kept them, not out of mercy, but because they understood now. Power didn't come from title inflation or boardroom theatrics. It came from results. Aaron Voss sat across from me, uncharacteristically quiet. Frank Henley, now just another ex-C-suite ghost, hadn't been seen since the vote passed. Good riddance. "Victoria," Aaron began carefully, "before we conclude, I have a proposal." I didn't sit. He continued, voice tight. "We know you've turned Nexera into a high-functioning division under Alchemy. We'd like to formally offer you the CEO title, publicly, officially." The words hung there, suspended. 10 years ago, I would have said yes before he finished the sentence. But I wasn't that girl anymore. "I already lead," I said. "Titles don't change that." Aaron blinked, caught off guard. "It would signal stability," he tried. "It would show the market Nexera has evolved." I gave a soft, humorless smile. "Then maybe you should have thought about evolution when you fired the person who made it possible." He looked away. But the offer, it stirred something in me. Not ambition, not ego, closure. I sat down at last, but only to lean in. "You want to rehabilitate Nexera's image? Fine, but not with optics, with outcomes." I slid a proposal across the table, my terms, new hiring protocols, internal mentorship tracks, transparent performance metrics, no more promotions based on politics or charm, just skill, value, vision. He read in silence. "This," I said, "is the only way forward." He signed. And just like that, the last piece fell into place. When I walked out of that building, my building technically, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. They hadn't won, not by erasing me, not by trying to ruin me, because I had built something bigger than Nexera ever was, and it bore only one face, mine. People like to talk about the climb. They show the mountaintop, the glory, the view. But they rarely show the scraped knees, the cracked voice in closed-door meetings, or the resignation letters that never got read. I built my empire from a quiet desk in a corner office no one remembered I sat in. And now, as I stood before a packed auditorium at Alchemy's annual summit, our largest yet, I saw the faces of so many who reminded me of myself. Sharp, capable, underestimated. Waiting to be invited in when, really, they just needed a blueprint to build their own door. I spoke for 20 minutes about innovation, culture, systems that scale. But it was the final line that mattered. If they won't give you the seat, design the table. Afterward, people asked how I did it, how I went from forgotten to founder, from fired to empire builder. So here's what I tell them. And maybe, here's what I'm telling you. Keep the receipts, not just the emails, the files, the metrics, but the truth of what you've done. Your impact has data. Document it. Own it. Build while you're overlooked. The silence they give you, fill it with strategy. While they underestimate you, they won't see you coming. Let rejection redirect you. Every door that closed on me wasn't the end. It was a reroute. What felt like failure was actually freedom in disguise. Your value doesn't shrink just because someone else can't see it. Read that again. When the time comes, walk in without apology. You don't owe anyone a softer version of your ambition. I never wanted to destroy Nexera. I just refused to disappear for it. And in the end, what I built wasn't about revenge. It was about creating something so resilient, so true to my vision, that no one could ever claim it wasn't mine. Now the name Victoria Dale means something, not because I demanded it, but because I built it, brick by brick, project by project, client by client. If you're still sitting at someone else's table, waiting for permission, consider this your sign. Start building.